Hey everybody, this is Aaron from the Everything Elite podcast. I want to thank you all so much for listening to our show. Hopefully you found this episode because you already subscribed to our feed. But if you don't, however you are listening to this right now, whatever app you're using, it's got to have a subscribe button. Hit subscribe. You'll get our free weekly episodes every Thursday morning when they come out. We record right after Dynamite every Wednesday night, post them the next morning. This is not one of those episodes, though. This is something altogether different. Our podcast is supported by the people who subscribe over at patreon.com/everythingelite. We put out a lot of bonus content over there. Now, for the first time ever, we've decided to unlock one of those episodes and put it in this free feed so that everybody gets a chance to check it out. And it gives you an idea of what we're doing over on Patreon. You can decide whether you want to go over to patreon.com/everythingelite and support us. The episode that we've decided to share is part of a series that we call This Is. If you listen to the show, you know that's how I start the show. So we came up with the idea to do a series of episodes diving deeply into the careers of various AEW roster members. The very first one we did was Cody. We've done the Young Bucks. Most recently, we did CM Punk and Bryan Danielson. This episode, though, is about Jon Moxley. This episode originally came out about a year ago while Moxley was still the AEW champion, but it's not time sensitive because we're not talking about what he was doing then. We're talking about his entire career. We start all the way from the beginning. We talk about his training. Then we talk about his time in Puerto Rico, DGUSA, WWE. There's a Bloodsport match we talk about. There's a New Japan match we talk about. We picked 5 matches. This was Mike and me. We picked 5 matches, and we kind of traced his career through those matches. A little help from information we could get from the Wrestling Observer newsletter along the way, but it's just a fun 90-minute or so adventure through Jon Moxley's career. So we thought this was a good one for everybody to check out. I think you'll like it. If you do, head over patreon.com/everythingelite. We got 3 tiers to subscribe over there. All the info's there. You go to the website, you'll see it. Subscribe, you'll get this. You'll get lots of other things. So check it out. Let us know your feedback on it. We'd love to hear from you. And enjoy. This is...
This is Jon Moxley. I'm actually driving this time, y'all. It's your old pal Iron Mike Spears, joined as always by Aaron Bentley. Aaron, how did that This Is sound to you? Do you feel like I came in a little strong, or did I hit the notes exactly as is?
I don't know if you can see it because my windsock kind of covers up my face, but I got a big grin on my face. I was very happy about it. I thought it sounded great. So congratulations, Mike. Good job.
It's my back of the hall, the back of the house projection that I was taught. Yeah, that I did from the diaphragm, not from the throat, not using my head voice, using my big, manly chest voice.
Now, Mike, now that we found out that your whiteboard is right behind you, which has changed so much, now I want to know, okay, we've got the Mike's mental health meter.
Right.
I'm familiar with that. But then there's something to my right, your left of, well, when you turn around, it'll be to your right of the mental health meter. What am I looking at there?
You mean right here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a Makita sticker. That's it.
Oh,
yeah.
With the hat that you got, probably.
Yeah, I just came with when I got the Neo Ito Respect Army stuff. So
okay, I just couldn't tell what it was from here. Looks cool.
Yes, just to describe what I have on this back wall, as podcasting is a visual medium. Got the whiteboard, got the Maki Ito sticker right there, my Konami 8x10, my Sadaharu O painting, and then my brother once got me, this is like the above this, I don't know if you were able to see it, Aaron, It is the original patents, or like reproduction of the original patents for baseballs and bats. So.
Oh, wow. No, I can only the highest I can see is, I believe, the top of your whiteboard.
Okay. I was just unfamiliar about distance, and then I have random handbills that I've got from a GPS when I got my Triangle Lancer T-shirt around my board, and then a lot of bounce foam. So my sound does not sound like a cavern, because my office is in a cavern. Like I'm at the narrow end of it, and that's why everyone's perception was completely fucked up. But my office is a very long, narrow room.
Now that I see it, of course, I can't unsee it. It's one of those things. I can obviously tell you got that bookcase there, and
right, yes,
where that wall is. But before, just had no idea, man. Wow.
I mean, like, and we've been doing this, at least with this setup, for over a year now. I would think that you would have picked up on it, but I guess not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fine. That's fine. Observation is not necessary for this field.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Thankfully.
So this week, or for this edition of This Is, we're covering Jon Moxley, the current AEW World Heavyweight Champion, someone whose career I'm a little bit more intimately familiar with, so that's why I'm taking the wheel here. Of course, y'all probably know I've been doing a full year study into the history of DGUSA. Jon Moxley figured really heavily into that, so we just figured that it'd probably be better for me to kind of do the recommendations and be the one throwing out the notes for this one. But Aaron, when was the first time you heard of Jon Moxley?
So I took a very long break from watching pro wrestling.
Right.
The early 2000s until about 2013, 2014. So I think when I got back into wrestling, well, he was already in developmental, right?
Yes, he was signed to developmental in 2011.
But when I started getting back into it and then kind of becoming aware of the indies again, he was still kind of referred to as like a big indie guy. As like somebody who was really good on the indies and was expected to be, therefore, really good at some point in WWE. I'm not sure when his episode was on Cole Cabana's podcast.
Sure.
Not sure when that came out, but I definitely listened to that. But the first time I would have actually seen him wrestle would have been in the Shield.
Yeah, that's why I figured, like, I know that your break, because he did do some IWA Mid-South, but that was probably during your hiatus. But he's an interesting person, Jon Moxley, and definitely it did seem like that there is like a delineation point, like you're talking about, the people that were first exposed to him through WWE and then the people that were following the indies. And I feel like that's kind of like a natural sort of inclination for people. I think, especially, at least, like, because his indies time was between the first indie boom and the most recent one. So he came about during one of the lulls that was like right after Ring of Honor took off, and then everyone got signed up for Ring of Honor and they were kind of rebuilding. This was like really deep into the Austin Aries era of Ring of Honor being surrounded it. So just give people a sense of time. So, it doesn't surprise me too much to hear that, especially given, like, he's an interesting enough guy that, I mean, he's practically from your neck of the woods. He basically started his career in your neck of the woods. That's interesting how, at least how indie wrestling is, that for a guy who was really like a Ohio River Valley person, that he did not necessarily become like that big of a figure that you would have known of him before the Shield.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if I had been following wrestling during that time, I'm sure I would have been aware of him on some level. Even if I wasn't like really tied into the indies, you probably around this area, you probably couldn't have escaped it if you were into wrestling. But yeah, not having any. I mean, when I was out of wrestling. I had no real connection to it, so I missed all that. But yeah, when I got back into it, he was doing the Shield thing and with the CM Punk thing and all that. And I was pretty immediately taken with the whole group. Like, I thought they were all pretty interesting as a group. And like I said, that probably led me to go back and listen to the Cole Cabana episode with him and find out more about his time on the indies. But then when I started like digging in a little bit to that, mostly what I would see was like promo stuff. That's kind of what people would focus on. And they were weird as fuck, man. It was like, I don't know, this guy's weird. What's his deal?
And it's something that, so just to go over the 5 matches we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about his story like they're then. We have one match from Dragon Gate USA. This was his big feud against Jimmy Jacobs. A match in FCW, it's Ambrose versus Regal 2. The debut match of the Shield at TLC 2012. Him versus Tomohiro Ishii at the G1 last year. And then the Dirty Daddy versus Jon Moxley match at Bloodsport this year. So I feel like we got like a interesting match sample, because he is someone that I think at first glance, everyone knows him for his promo skills. And it's very interesting, like delving into him, looking back, and especially like this period before he was known for his promos, because he was someone who was in the indies for a long time before DGUSA. And I mean, he is someone who got started very young in wrestling.
Yeah, and I have a big take on his wrestling. If you listen to, the first version of this this style of the This Is episodes where we talked about Chris Jericho, I traced like a couple of moves, or especially a specific move that tied through Jericho, but you also like saw his wrestling style change through all those matches. So I don't want to, go into that take until we've talked about some more of these matches. But yeah, we didn't watch promos for this, but I've seen some of his promos, obviously, from those times. And then of course I've seen a million of them from WWE and since then. And that's something you can really know about how it's progressed through his career.
And I'd argue that that's like the through point is his promos. And it's interesting to me, at least, because one of the things that I kind of watched to get us ready for this was there was a shoot interview that he did with Smart Mark Video right before he got signed, talking about like how he just was out of wrestling and cut like this route and was brought back in by Drake Younger, of all people, in 2007 and 2008, and just like started rambling and got into just a weird headspace and went with it. And this promo is still online. It happened at IPW. I don't know if you ever saw this one. This is like one of the most bizarre promos I've ever seen, and that's saying something from Jon Moxley, where he like starts like there's an interviewer that's with him, and he like basically just makes her uncomfortable, like not like sexually or like physically. He's just very weird, and then he like takes a long like smell and says, "You smell like the inside of my mama's purse." And it's just like very like, yeah, very raw, just Jon Moxley as a guy who is already basically went through wrestling, fell out of wrestling, was brought back into wrestling in 2007, 2008. And ever since then, like this one promo for like the last 11 years, for when I would say that promos are his own doing versus the WWE scripted promos, there is a through line there. And it's very interesting to me that he's a guy more known for his promos than his ring skills. And I would say that looking at just talking about like a through line between the matches, really, other than like the WWE like Shield matches, he's not someone who I would say necessarily has evolved a whole lot move wise or like style wise throughout his career.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if we're going to talk about it, then I'll go ahead and do my take now. But it's basically that Moxley is really an interesting character as a wrestler. I'll say I went into this not thinking very highly of Moxley as a worker, as like an in-ring guy. And I come away with a much deeper respect for his ring work, even though there's really no difference between his work in this DGUSA match and his work in the Bloodsport match that we talk about last. He's a guy who's basically been able to do the same work throughout his career. And what's interesting about that is he's a brawler, right? That's his style of wrestling. But he's not a terribly gifted striker. He does a lot of submission stuff. He's not terribly great at that. He's not particularly athletic. He gets by on charisma, on his presence, and on his willingness to go beyond physically, or in the type of violence that he's willing to do in the ring. What's the difference? Other than like he's a little bit cleaner, what's the difference between Jon Moxley and Nick Gage?
I would say the only difference is that Jon Moxley spent time in like in the last territories where he like learned like territorial brawling stuff, whereas Nick Gage is just unfiltered brawling.
Right. But it's like they're pretty similar as like the full picture of them as wrestlers. You know, Moxley is a lot, especially nowadays, a lot more cleaned up, than Nick Gage is right now. But it's pretty fascinating to me that it would be hard if you just want to talk about his ring work. It would be hard for me to come at you with something he is especially good at as a wrestler. But it's the whole package when you put it together that really works.
And it's something that like this package. So this shoot that was from 2011, he's someone who his career, he doesn't really talk a lot about how he started. He was someone that incorporated a lot of his tough upbringing. I mean, he's from a very economically disadvantaged area of Ohio. He had addicts in his family, and he just found wrestling and immediately just was bugged HWA, started in at 16 doing stuff with HWA, and was fully like trained in wrestling at age 18, and just was so like full force that like he pestered Tommy Dreamer when he was a 19-year-old to get a tryout. And he was willing to drive to the Carolinas against Eminem and did a show on Velocity. I don't know if this Velocity match ever made TV, but after that, he went to Puerto Rico. And for people who aren't too familiar with the history of Puerto Rico kind of was the last territory. And especially like in the early 2000s when he was there, it still was a place that people could work consistently. He talked about basically being 20 years old in Puerto Rico, being hot shit, wrestling 3 days a week, training and working out the other 3 days a week, having a lot of expendable income, which is something he made like a big point of. Like, I was 20, first time I really even had any money. I was in Puerto Rico when everything was cheap, and I just got really deep into, as he very matter-of-factly said, got really deep into drinking, doing coke and pills. And he talked about like, it just was like a lifestyle thing. He was like, this was something that like I got a lot of my screw ups out of the way in Puerto Rico. And I also saw how Puerto Rico as a territory, how familiar are you, AB, with Puerto Rico and Puerto Rico as a wrestling territory?
I haven't watched a ton of it, but I know a decent amount about it, mostly through, being into Bruiser Brody and like learning stuff about Brody. I mean, I think like there are similarities, I think, between Jon Moxley and Bruiser Brody in a way. I thought a lot about Brody as I was watching these matches. Moxley, at least nowadays, is not as violent or as scary as Brody was at his peak. But he does strike me when I was watching the Ishii match, which we'll talk about later. He struck me as like, oh, if WWE had never happened for this guy, he could have easily gone to Japan and made a go of it as a Gaijin there. And
of course, Bruiser Brody, probably most well known for him being murdered in Puerto Rico. But there is like when you're talking about Nick Gage, like the thing is that if Nick Gage kind of is somewhat like an Abdul the Butcher style kind of thing, then definitely Moxley is Bruiser Brody. And that comes out of the Puerto Rican style of wrestling. It's very bloody. It's very brawl heavy. He said he went into Puerto Rico as like a technician, and then he found out that he was just going to be like this booed heel. He faked being English for a little bit, and then he was just like, I'm just going to be just all out, just be an asshole. And it took to him. And the one thing I kind of wish we were able to do with this, like we picked 5 matches, and I didn't necessarily want to get stuff to him before DGUSA. It would have been interesting to find like this tryout match he had with Morrison and Matthews or Mercury, Eminem on Velocity, like in 2006, because I feel like that like when we were watching the Jericho one, how we saw Jericho kind of evolve from being in WAR versus how he was in ECW. I feel like we would have had that moment if we had like this preamble match. If we had like a preview match from before he went to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, though by the time we saw Jericho in Japan, he's kind of already figured out who he is. I mean, he's not the style that he is now, but he's already figured out the style he would basically have in WCW and early WWE. So this would probably be a very different version of Moxley. But I really like what you said about Nick Gage as Abby and Moxley as Brody. Like, I think that's pretty fascinating, actually. Pretty interesting way to think about it. And if, hopefully once Nick Gage is healthy again, like there's apparently a real chance that we see Nick Gage show up in AEW. So we could see matches between those two.
Yeah, and I feel like that'd be real interesting, especially given like the kind of matches he had with Eddie Kingston, and I feel like that's something that's straight in his wheelhouse, where he can do like promo heavy brawling, and it kind of like just transition to our first match that we're going to talk about. This is from Dragon Gate USA Bushido Code of the Warrior 2010. It was outside of Boston, Massachusetts on October 29th, 2010, and like talking about like brawling and bruising and like his contemporary, the guy that did it just like of the other indie boom was against him in this match. This was an I Quit match against Jimmy Jacobs, and the knowing that you are not as much of a pre-evolve a WWE guy, what were your thoughts overall about getting right into like 2010 Gabe, like at the peak of 2010 Gabe?
I mean, this looked like every Evolve show, just like it was in this like dingy building. It wasn't well lit. Nothing looked good. The good thing about Gabe that was there was Lenny Leonard was on the call. So that was a positive thing. But yeah, this just struck me as like, yeah, I bet this is what Gabe was doing in 2010.
It did. The only like big difference I'll say for people who are big Evolve heads, especially like they're like everything evolves and how the period was from like 2017 to 2018. Gabe in this time period, he had a little bit of money that he put straight towards the weirdest things, such as always licensing metal songs for music videos before all these big matches. And that's Gabe. Lenny doing a call solo. So I mean that's pretty standard fare here. This was a big blow off in DGUSA, and just like a quick 2-minute thing for our listeners who aren't too familiar with DGUSA. This was formed after Gabe got fired from ROH. He had a relationship with Dragon Gate beforehand. That Dragon Gate was the most popular Japanese promotion in the West at the time. And they launched a promotion that originally was just going to be doing like it was going to be like 6 weekends a year, and then it turned into 3 weekend double shots. And then eventually, because of Gabe never being able to draw money, really, it fell apart. And Jon Moxley was the guy that he saw after he got fired from Ring of Honor. He went to an FIP show and saw his promos, and he fell in love with Jon Moxley. Jon Moxley, probably before Johnny Gargano became like his latest American guy, it was Jon Moxley. And he found a way in this promotion that was exclusively like Japanese style promotion and done in the Dragon Gate style of a lot of tags, a lot of unit warfare. He decided to give him to one of the units in Kamikaze USA as like the American mouthpiece. But the interesting thing about this, Aaron, is do you know what Jon Moxley's opinion of Dragon Gate is?
I have no idea.
He hates it.
that tracks. It's really antithetical to his style.
Yeah, he hates it. His wrestling style, he says, like, this does not work with how I wrestle. He hated wrestling against the Dragon Gate guys because Dragon Gate style is the most common thing to the indie sprint. And I mean, he's a brawler, and like this happened. And weirdly enough, he only had like one match. Like the one match we changed for a Shield match was like his one big singles match against a Japanese wrestler. His time in Dragon Gate USA, he first had a long feud with Tommy Dreamer. And that was really weird. And it kind of shifted into Jimmy Jacobs, then later Homicide. But this was kind of the big takeoff point for him, at least amongst the smarter wrestling fans and the newsletters, was this blood feud that ended with a really bloody I Quit match between him and Jimmy Jacobs.
That's kind of interesting that you say that. And I hate to get out of order, but when we start talking about his WWE run, maybe we'll come back to this. But it's like, oh, as this guy really got going in WWE, it was shifting to an indie sprint style. The house style in WWE was shifting there. And so I think that may go even more to why Moxley in ring didn't really work in WWE very well.
Yeah, and he was the bloodbath worker in Dragon Gate USA. And I know that we've just came off of an I Quit match, a big one. It's interesting seeing another one done on the indies where, kind of like the Eddie Kingston one, this is not like a crazy spot per spot match. This is the only weapons they really had were a chair, spikes, and a belt. And they just proceeded to bleed for 15 minutes.
Yeah, this was a great match, honestly. I really loved this match. It showed that you can escalate a match in 15 minutes. It doesn't have to take 35 minutes. Even a blood feud, like a real blood feud, where you can tell. I mean, I could tell these guys hated each other, and I knew nothing about the story except what Lenny Leonard told me and what was in the music video at the beginning. But they were able to get all that done in 15 minutes. I loved that spot where Jimmy Jacobs was handcuffed behind his back, and he worked that into a choke. He was able to choke Moxley while handcuffed. My main thought was Darby Allin needs to do this spot in a match. He should just steal this and do it. And as for like just Mox in the match, this is, first thing I was like, it's pretty similar to what we see now. He's probably more athletic and fluid at this time in his career, but a very similar offensive attack. You can already see all the charisma. So interesting place to start with Mox.
Yeah. And Jimmy Jacobs at this time was known mainly like this is a time after he got fired from Ring of Honor for drug use. He cleaned himself back up and he was back in Ring of Honor pretty soon after this. But Gabe brought him into this promotion because he thought he needed to have more Americans basically out front because he had big issues like trying to do angles with Japanese wrestlers and trying to like figure out how do I book month to month and story to story with this. So they had Jimmy Jacobs along in with this. And this was really kind of, I think, the match in 2010 that really kind of set him apart as a brawler. He did do a bunch of death matches between Ian Rotten and IWA Mid-South and DJ Hyde and CCW, but those are viewed so differently at this time period than something like this, which is just like a full-out bloodbath for 15 minutes. The big things were the spike. Of course, Jimmy Jacobs loves the spike. Another kind of like Bruiser Brody thing in there. And they ended up having big spike battles. Jimmy Jacobs had a belt on his boot, and he took it off and started whipping, and later it got tied behind his arms behind his back, like AB said. And then leading into a very bloody finishing stretch. This is realistically probably one of the most I've seen someone bleed on a major U.S. indie show. And it ended with like the most like the most like I get it on why you would submit. Jon Moxley lost his match because Jimmy Jacobs started spiking him in the groin repeatedly. He's like, you know what? I quit. I'm done here. And just was like a real tour de force match, I feel like. And this is one of those DGUSA matches that you wouldn't really think about going back and watching, but it still is like this excellent indie brawl and one of the better indie I quit matches, in my opinion.
I kind of hated the finish. Like, I just thought it was like a little goofy.
I mean, it's Gabe. Yes.
It was very like 2010 culturally, like what would happen there. So yeah, that was kind of a bummer for me, but the rest of the match was so good that I'm okay with it. Yeah, Jimmy Jacobs was bleeding an insane amount. I mean, literally having to wipe his eyes so that he could see. We didn't talk about Jon Moxley having moxicity on his tie, which really cracked me up.
The one thing I'll say he's definitely improved over the last like 10 years. He understands imagery and branding a lot better than he did when he first started.
Yeah, I could see that. But it's funny because it's like even his body. I mean, obviously he's aged, 10 years, and he's gotten in a little better shape, but he kind of also just looks the same as he did. He's lost some hair, obviously. So a real Mox has just been able to like do Mox for 15 years now.
Yeah, and it's something that I think that it's interesting how he's kind of stayed consistent like that. It's interesting to me, like this kind of thing and this kind of match and a promotion like this that was so like a part of everything else. He then had a feud with Homicide, AB, that was so bad that they put it on pay-per-view. And here's the finish of this feud. It was another blood feud. That's what he really did. Was Homicide was so pissed off by him, he knocked him out, then pulled with a cop killer, then pulled Moxley on top of him for a 3 count, and then went to go find scissors to cut off his tongue. This is Gabe. This is Gabe in 2010.
Oh, jeez.
And you talk about other things. So this was towards his end. He would be signed by WWE in April 2011. This was after he finished second in the Observer Awards in 2010 for Best Brawler and top 10 for Best Interviews. I did not put this in the notes because I wanted to spring this on you. So I'm just going to let you take a guess. His last weekend was WrestleMania weekend 2011, Dragon Gate USA. They had 2 shows in Atlanta. Do you know what his last feud and his last match was in Dragon Gate USA?
I actually read this earlier, and I'm trying to remember what it was. But no, I do not remember now.
So he was feuding with Rebby Sky.
Wow. Maybe I didn't read this. I thought I did.
Gabe brought in Rebby Sky now known as Rebby Hardy, into DGUSA because she was a Howard Stern call-in girl and was like she was Miss Howard Stern for 2009. She was a Giants girl, and Jon Moxley and in Gabe form, Gabe had a pretty culturally insensitive feud between the two of them, and it basically ended to like, this is also how Rebby Sky met Matt Hardy, because Matt Hardy was at the WrestleMania shows completely just not in good place, and you could blame Gabe for pretty much all of that. And then the feud was that eventually he was so mad at Akira Tozawa, who at that time was the most popular guy on the indies, not wanting to beat up Rebby Sky for him. So he kicked Akira Tozawa out of Kamikaze USA, and then he said, all right, Tozawa, if you beat me in a bunkhouse match this night, I will leave the company and get your title match. It was a 4-minute match that Tozawa won, and that's it. That was his last DGUSA match. Gabe knew he was signed, and that's what he put forth for him.
A bunkhouse match, huh?
Yeah. Do you think Akira Tozawa knows what a bunkhouse match is?
I'm guessing he doesn't. I'm going to be honest.
Nope. And it was impromptu too, so it was not like that. Like Tozawa was like in his normal like shorts doing a bunkhouse match.
Sure, that's very funny. That sounds like something I would want to watch. That's funny. I think it's interesting that he was second for best brawler at this time. I feel like, I don't know, maybe he was a bigger deal than I perceived him as with the passage of time before, when he was finishing up on the indies.
I mean, he was in CZW. I think he was a CZW deathmatch champion for a bit. But this was like a time period that like him and Necro Butcher were like the two big, like the indies were doing a whole lot of brawls then. So it made sense. I think the winner of that year, I could go back all through my notes and figure, because I know I've talked about this before. I want to say it was either Necro or maybe Kevin Steen, currently known as Kevin Owens, were the ones who beat him out. So like it was very much within the style of the time.
Got it. Well, I mean, it's fascinating the way that WWE has treated the indies or signed people over the years. Like looking back at this, Moxley doesn't, jump out to me as someone that they would necessarily be interested in. He doesn't really have anything they want other than size. Right. Yeah. He's got good size, but they don't really care if you can cut promos. He doesn't really work a WWE style. So it's fascinating to me that he happened to be around at a time that he got, and I know from doing some reading that he had 2 or 3 tryout matches before, or 2 or 3 tryouts before he ever got signed. But just interesting that he hooked up with them at all.
Yeah. So the way that it went for him was like he was already on the WWE radar when he was a 19 and 20-year-old. Came back from Puerto Rico, had a tryout that bombed so poorly because he was, as he said, I lost a lot of weight. I was drinking and doing a lot of pills at the time. So Johnny Ace looked at me and said, what the fuck is your deal? He had another tryout that happened right before the Signature Pharmacy scandal, and then kind of just left wrestling and came back in talking about the Drake Younger connection, bring him back in the Midwest. And then Gabe kind of set him in the way. I mean, this was the thing. And I know this is Joe Lanza's favorite talking point, but you went to go work for Gabe at this time and you got signed, and that worked for him. Talking about who they were signing at the time, I do have this really funny note from the May 30th, 2011 Observer. Here are the people who are in Jon Moxley's WWE tryout intake class. He was listed as his real name, Jonathan Good. That's out there. I don't feel bad about saying that. But also people in his tryout class: Ethan Levin, a 6'6", 270-pound Israeli who's built as a self-made millionaire diamond wholesaler. So yes, they were doing blood diamond stuff. They were doing God of War thing right there. Alexander Rusev, a 6 foot flat, 305-pounder who is built together like a tank. One of those guys you'd see on the World's Strongest Man shows on ESPN2. All this Dave Meltzer, by the way. So Rusev was in his induction class. Ted DiBiase's son, Brett DiBiase, who's been in the news lately for Medicare scamming and is currently in jail, I believe, at this time. Audrey Marie, who was like big, like before Summer Rae was the big like cause du jour, Audrey Marie was the big women's prospect cause for sure. And someone whose name is Eden Styles, who I'm not going to quote Dave here because Dave, not very good about this kind of stuff. says
I will quote it because it's very
Okay.
funny. I mean, it's funny because of what it is.
It's a
The other
complete
is
aside, by the way.
Yes, the other is named Eden Styles, who looks like a fitness competitor with the abs and muscularity and fake big boobs.
That is Dave for you.
It's Dave Meltzer, baby.
And of course, if you're not familiar with that name, Eden Styles is now better known as Brandy Rhodes.
I did not realize that Rusev came into the WWE system that early.
Yeah. And he only did like a couple like months of training with Gangrel and Rikishi before this.
Yeah, like when I was getting back into everything is when he like popped up on NXT at some point around that time. And I just kind of figured he was a pretty new signing at that point. So I didn't realize he had been around for like 3-4 years before that ever happened.
Right. Yeah. And as you said, like he became Dean Ambrose, did not really fit any sort of mold whatsoever for what they were doing. So they kind of had him start a feud with William Regal that kind of became the big trademark feud of FCW in its last few years before it turned into NXT. And it ended with this next match we watched was the last ever FCW match. It was a rematch between Dean Ambrose and William Regal from the rematch happened on July 15th, 2012. And did you ever get much into FCW? Like, I know, again, this is right before you got back into it, but like, were you aware of this feud whatsoever, or were you aware of kind of how FCW was before, like, the Shield, basically?
Yeah, I know some FCW stuff, and I've watched some stuff here and there. I knew about this feud, but I'd never watched this match before. The fascinating thing is, they got these big posters in the back, and we see Alex. These are people that I noticed: Alex Riley, Bo Rotundo, Mason Ryan, and Leo Kruger. Murderers Row, there, baby.
and like, that's the wild thing about FCW. So this is before NXT. They basically this was a converted Winn-Dixie that they made into an arena that had Dusty Rhodes and Jim Ross on the call for this match that, like, you can't watch this and not think, oh, this is a developmental product. Like this.
And this is on TV, right? This is on Bright House House Sports Network.
Yeah, Bright House Sports, which is a Florida regional sports carrier.
Yeah, if you had like the MLB package, when you watch like Tampa Bay games, they were on. There was a time where they were on Bright House.
Yeah, so this was all before Triple H really came in and revamped things. But the interesting feud, they would have WWE people come into SCW, and this was towards the end of William Regal's in-ring career. And the like one evolution point I'll say is like there is, and especially watching the New Japan and the Bloodsport match we watched after this, you do kind of feel like that Jon Moxley picked up a lot out of this match and added it to his move set, especially William Regal's like signature moves.
Absolutely. He took the Regal knee lift and carried that on. Well, and he uses the STF also. So something else that he took from William Regal. Also, I was going to say also Sasha Banks is in the crowd at this show.
That was her. Yeah.
Yeah. You can see her at the end and I didn't pause it and go back to look, but she's like standing with some other wrestlers. So I thought that was interesting. But this match was fascinating. Regal also had those Cesaro matches. He's like good at this type of match where it's basically, Moxley, what I've read, my understanding is they wrestled once, Regal beat him, and then Moxley basically stalked him for like a year trying to demand a rematch. And so, the story here is basically that he was obsessed with like getting that win back. He was really obsessed with beating him. Of course, ultimately he was unable to in the match because they had to stop it because Regal's ear gets opened up like really bad and presumably gets concussed from getting knocked into the ring post, or not the ring post, but the turnbuckle here.
Yeah, and so like the feud was leading up to it was that Ambrose was kind of like the big thing that they kind of pushed Ambrose as, and Dusty Rhodes is on the call, kept on calling this, is like this James Dean rebel without a cause kind of person. And basically Regal identified him as like, I was you once. This is a very kind of dangerous road you're walking down. Something that he kind of picked up and applied to the Darby feud, by the way, which I think is kind of funny. And
that's a good pull. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the first match, the one that Regal won, he basically kayfabe dislocated Ambrose's shoulder into the corner steps. That's the big spot in this match. Is so Ambrose is pretty much dominated by Regal for like the first 10 minutes of this match. And the big thing is he puts his arm between the ring posts and the ring steps and starts kicking it and stomping it in there, trying to do another dislocation thing. And then eventually Ambrose gets on offense and just ends up ruining this old guy's life in a way. He takes off a turnbuckle pad. He does a bunch of kicking the head into the turnbuckle, and that's what busted his ear open. And then basically they had to stop the match, and Ambrose took him out. There was a moment where it's very much I'm so sorry, I love you moment where Regal kind of like applauded him and then told him to do him in, and he ate a Regal knee and was knocked out. And that was the last thing they had on FCW TV, was this very like wild thing that, again, like in a lot of ways, I like watching these. Moxley's a territory guy in 2020. And because this felt like a territory, like big feud blow off match, especially given how FCW was at the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. He's a real throwback in that way. And it was a good reminder to me that, I know Moxley is doing this thing where he's like, remember, we're the good guys. And he's been like this white meat baby face, but this was a good reminder of that. There's a ton of money in Jon Moxley as a heel. And there's a huge heel run for him in AEW that they don't even have to get close to anytime soon, but they can use that for several years if they want to. But this was also, and I don't know that he's done as good of a job in any AEW match as he did in this. It's like when you're a really good brawler, you also have to be really good at selling, if you really want to be able to pay it off. And he was great here, the way that he worked over the shoulder. But then, and this is something I was talking about on Jumping Bomb Audio, my Joshi podcast, about limb matches. And I was criticizing a match because of poor limb selling. And Taylor's like, okay, yeah, but when do you ever hear people say, oh, this was a great match that had to do with limb selling? People more criticize poor limb selling than celebrate good limb selling. So this is exactly an example of a great limb selling match. And then Mox says the thing, okay, this is not going to feature into the finish, this shoulder deal. So he it's maybe a little over the top, but he goes out of his way to show that he is like putting his shoulder back into place and like, okay, I really got to like do something so that my shoulder doesn't bother me. And then he's fine the rest of the match. But to me, that's enough to be like, okay, the shoulder's okay. Like I buy that. So he did a great job with that there. Another interesting thing about this match to me, I think about this a lot. And maybe this is Nate's influence. It's like, what makes a good wrestling match? To me, this was a great match. I loved this match. I thought it was a ton of fun. The crowd did not give a single shit about it. Had no interest in it.
These crowds in Tampa were terrible for FCW the entire time.
I'm sure. But it made me think about like that Benoit Malenko match at Hog Wild or whatever, where the crowd hates it, but it goes on for like 40 minutes. And it's a killer match. But then I thought about like the Ishii match that we'll talk about in a minute. The crowd's going fucking nuts for it. So it's like, I don't know. Who are wrestling matches for, right? If this match was for the wrestling fans who were watching it, then it was a great match. If it's for the live crowd, it wasn't a very good match because they did not get into the shoulder work or any of the stuff with Regal really at all until the end when it really started breaking down. So anyway, I'm not sure that that's part of what we're talking about on this show, but it was interesting to me.
I think that's like an interesting point, though. I think that it's something that, especially with someone like Regal, who is always bandied about as like some of these all-time great wrestlers, and you're leading a young guy through this feud, and it's Regal's legitimacy that is the thing at stake here, because Ambrose is coming in there just saying like, oh, okay, fuck you, old man, I'm going to do this thing. But it's Regal's gravitas that's supposed to like ground people and like and get them more invested in this, because it's like, can the old guy like shut up the upstart? And it's almost, I would say, a ding on Regal in a way, for him being like this veteran who wasn't necessarily working to a crowd that, to be fair against them, there were never any hot FCW crowds, but I think that more is shouldered on his feet there.
Yeah, I think now there comes a time, and I wasn't watching FCW consistently, so maybe it's like comes a time when you're like, you know what, these crowds are not going to be into whatever we do, so let's just do what we think is good, and that's understandable, and
Sure.
I would appreciate that because I mean, I'm obviously biased from having watched wrestling for a long ass part of my life and being very deep into it. But to me, this is a very good match. Even when it falls apart, it's very compelling. So it's, I don't know. That makes it really hard to judge, like from an
Sure.
objective standpoint, whether this is good or not. But to me, it's very good. And I would recommend anybody listening to this to go seek it out if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, I'll make sure to have all these matches in our show notes so people can check it out. And it's something that really, it's this next match and talking about his WWE stint is like the big aberration here, because I think if you take the other four matches, you see Jon Moxley as we've mentioned newfangled Bruiser Brody in a way. We've talked about promos like this, but as a territory wrestler, because he's a territory guy, and you could tell he's a territory guy here. Now we kind of go forward. A year later, the Shield makes their debut at Survivor Series 2012, helping CM Punk defend the WWE title in a three-way match against the Ryback and John Cena. And they kind of just got called up out of nowhere. It's interesting to note that Moxley was in FCW and NXT was launched while he was in developmental. Moxley was never on NXT TV. Of course, Seth Rollins is the former NXT champion, and Roman Reigns, they kind of had him on and off TV, but they put this group of three guys together. The story, of course, goes that Punk wanted to have Chris Hero in instead of Roman Reigns, but the company knew that Roman Reigns was going to be the star, but it would be Ambrose, Rollins, and Reigns, and they would have formed the Shield, a trio, and for most of the first part of their WWE career, they would be known mostly as a insanely effective trio. And it starts off here at the TLC pay-per-view in 2012, where the Shield has a 6-man TLC match with Daniel Bryan and Kane. They were Team Hell No at the time, and the Ryback. And interesting match to go back and watch, I would say. This is the one match that I would say held up the least in my out of these 5 matches.
Also, what a story of these matches, as the order we watch them in, is watching the quality of the commentary. So we started out with Lenny Leonard, who is, for my money, probably the best commentator in wrestling. And then we went to Jim Ross, who frankly was better in that FCW match than I anticipated going in. He did a pretty good job of telling the story. But then, my God, this Michael Cole, JBL, Jerry Lawler commentary team it's just awful to listen to, especially at the height of JBL talking shit about Daniel Bryan at every chance he gets. It's just miserable to listen to.
A whole lot of world's toughest vegan comments, the goat, no, and yes, and just like kind of like pulls you out of it after like watching the other ones. And then even, I mean, comparing this commentary to Kevin Kelly, by far the worst one we've had on this thing, and not necessarily that strong at putting over your new huge heel trio here in this match.
No, not at all. They spent way more, which I know they needed to get over this story about whether they were working for CM Punk or whatever, but they spent way more time doing that than ever trying to make us believe that these guys were really dangerous or whatever. Probably goes along with this note that you included from The Observer, where apparently people within WWE were worried about Ambrose and Rollins being in this match because, they'd only done like small houses before. And it's like, okay, well, if you've ever watched Moxley work before, he's going to fit in just fine in this match. It's going to be okay. And I think that was clear from this. It's like, I'm very tired of these matches. I don't really have any interest in watching another TLC match, probably as long as I live. And so this grated on me pretty quickly. But if I honed in on, well, 2 things. One, Ryback was cool as shit. And it sucks that he was taken away from us too soon. But when I was also honing in on just like what Mox was doing, it's like, okay, this is a guy. We hear so much about guys who come into WWE and they have to dramatically change their style. I was thinking a lot about Ricochet and how they kind of took away what Ricochet was good at and neutered him, and now he sucks and isn't over, and you like wonder why. But you see Mox, basically he could just do what he did. I mean, he's not doing like as bloody of stuff as he would have done on the indies, but still basically his same brawling style. So it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, he's a smart enough guy, and especially in retrospect, like when now he's doing these interviews, that he's willing to be more open about his thoughts on the wrestling industry and the thoughts as like a wrestling person. Like he was always going to be fine. Like he knew to kind of roll it back here, and it's just interesting. Like Ryback at the time was probably at like his most over because he's feuding with CM Punk over the WWE title. I mean, the Ryback was just at peak Ryback at that time. And then it just made you really like you watch this match, and like my biggest takeaway away from Moxley was they really put Reigns up in the main roster way before he was ready, and maybe that's part of the reason why they were a little bit worried about Ambrose and Rollins, because they would have to do almost all the heavy lifting in this match.
Yeah, but they did. I mean, and they were good at it. There are cool spots in this match. It's just like it's so overdone, that it's hard to get worked up about. Thinking about Michael Cole, he had a line at one point that I love where he's like, "Oh, the Ryback who claims that, quote, I love destruction."
Just God.
Yeah, it was bad. But yeah, you had like some big crazy spots here. It had everything you like. If you are into this style of match, it had everything you want that you could possibly want out of it. But most importantly, we just saw that that Mox was just Mox. I mean, he's got a tech vest on or whatever.
They like really try to do a lot of things to Jon Moxley's look throughout the Shield. They had the tech vest. He had the sleeveless hoodie for a bit. He had like the earring that he had on, and then like wife beater. I think it's very clear. Like this is the only WWE match that we watch of this. They had no idea what to do with Jon Moxley over the 8 years he was with that company.
Yeah, as I was watching this, I was like, maybe we should have watched one of the like Seth Rollins matches, and I was like, fuck, I would not have wanted to sit through one of those matches. But it goes back to what you said earlier, Mike, which is that the house style that became prevalent in WWE just did not go with Moxley's style. And it didn't help that if you look back when the Rollins heel turn first happened, Ambrose was super hot. And that's exactly when they veered into making him, the goofy clown character, and just killed all the momentum he had. I mean, Ambrose was basically what the Moxley character at AEW is now. That's what he was going for, and it would have been very successful and over, but they just killed him with nonsense.
And that's kind of the story of his WWE career. I did not figure we'd spend a whole lot of time on that. It's just not that interesting. I would argue that nearly everyone here has either lived through it, or if you're listening to this, like you're enough aware about it. And of course, Moxley has talked about it. They just had no idea what to do with Jon Moxley throughout his career. Like the only time it seemed like they had an idea to do with him, it kind of feels like FCW was the only time it's like, this is what he should be doing. And then as soon as he made the main roster and they broke away from the Shield, they turned him into like the cartoon character. And then he kind of got it a little bit back when he was champion, and then became like this weird, like plague obsessed person on his way out. And, just kind of like they booked a guy who, as a kid, counted WWE and WCW as like his outlets from a bad childhood, and like this was all he ever wanted to do. And it's very easy to see how Jon Moxley got so poisoned by the WWE apparatus by the time he left.
They should have teamed late era Jon Moxley with recent era Drake Younger.
Oh God,
they really could have had some fun conspiracy addled minds there. Yeah, if you are listening to this and thinking, but I want to go back and revisit some Moxley in WWE. The only thing, and I haven't gone back to watch these, but basically you're going to want to watch these big Shield trios matches. That's where you're going to get your best or your most mileage. I went back not too long ago, but not that recently, and watched the big Wyatt's one that was really well regarded, and it was still very good, as I recall then. They had those matches with Evolution that were good. So basically they didn't do anything good with this team, but they were able to have good matches. Shield was having like cool little I remember, wow, I was really WWE pilled there for a while, and I would watch like SmackDown and shit, and they would have cool trios matches that were just like meant nothing, but they'd be good. So there's plenty of good stuff to seek out from that like Shield trios era, but they never did anything, as you said, interesting with Dean Ambrose as a character.
Yeah, no, I was DVRing and watching SmackDown like as I was doing laundry, just because like you get like a 20-minute Shield trios match, and it would be more often than not be like a 3 1/4 to 3 3/4 star trios match. It'd be like 20 minutes long. You probably had Daniel Bryan in it as well, and he works really well with all three of these guys. Interestingly enough,
even Batista in that like the late part of his run, he was doing really good stuff.
I mean, Big Dave always owned though.
Yeah, well, once he got back in ring shape, he was kind of gassed when he first showed up. But
it's something though. Interesting enough, not a lot of crossover between Jon Moxley and Bryan Danielson in Dragon Gate USA. Both of them were at Dragon Gate USA at the same time. Did not cross paths. However, there was like one match that they had that was kind of interesting on like his second tour, but he was not really necessarily like kind of like the figure that would those two cross over. But I'm kind of sad we never really got like a long old school Daniel Bryan versus Jon Moxley storyline, because I feel like those two guys, like when we talk about them not doing anything of this, I would just say you have 6 months, y'all figure this out. Y'all are smart enough to figure this out, and it could have been something special.
What's your like if you were booking a Jon Moxley dream match from like those times, not today, but if you're like looking back into the past of a match that never happened, or didn't kind of get what it should have gotten, like who's a guy you think would have had a really killer match with indie era or even early WWE era Jon Moxley?
Oh, I think the person I would call up is peak Ring of Honor Samoa Joe. I think that is an interesting one, because how Moxley can sell and be like that kind of thing, and the promos would be solid there, and we know that both of them can brawl and just beat the shit out of each other. Like that is 2004 Samoa Joe versus 2010 Jon Moxley is the match I would have liked to see.
That's good. I like that. I'm searching right now to see if the match that I want has ever happened. But to me, this may be just AB core, but a Jon Moxley low key match.
Oh yeah.
Like we'll talk in a minute about the Ishii and Chris Dickinson matches, but it's like Moxley seems to. Okay, they actually had a match at Jersey All Pro in 2011, so I would love to see that. But Moxley seems to enjoy when somebody like hits him a little too hard,
Sure,
Low-key would. So I just imagine that would be a lot of fun. Jersey All Pro was this February 5th, 2011 main event. Dan Maff defeats Raven.
That sounds really Jersey All Pro to me. Like if you're going to say, okay, Mike, pick one Jersey All Pro guy and pick one famous person, I would have guessed Dan Maff versus Raven. That's it.
Well,
yeah.
The show is actually called quote the Raven.
Fuck that.
But there was a low key Jon Moxley match, so I'm gonna have to see if I can find this show.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I would love to see the match. That's it.
So Bryan Danielson did face Jon Moxley in DGUSA. It was in Milwaukee. It was a really strong match. I just had to look up to kind of do like that. So like they had like a really strong territory style match. Now I remember what it is. A territory style match out of it. It's just WWE just had no idea what to do with them, and that quickly kind of degenerated to him sticking around and then like sticking time on his contract. It finally expired after April 21st, 2019, where they did a network show where Moxley said he was famously only paid $500 for that show for the network. And then he went underground until Jon Moxley made his appearance at Double or Nothing 1 in Las Vegas, Nevada over it was Memorial Day weekend 2019. And out of nowhere, Jon Moxley was back, and everything kind of changed in a lot of ways, I would say, at least with like North American wrestling, because Jon Moxley walked into AEW after the main event at Double or Nothing, laid out both of them, and just kind of like made his mark as that he would be the guy in AEW. And it's kind of wild to think that's only 19 months ago. 19 months ago.
It's just also like really hard to remember now. And maybe I ate crow on this, but I think I was right, but I was proven wrong. I don't know. I was right and wrong, I think, all at the same time. But I questioned whether it was a big deal to get Moxley in AEW. He was so destroyed by that WWE run. Like his aura, his charisma was so destroyed that I was like, I don't know. Do I really want to see this guy on a weekly basis? And when he came out at Double or Nothing, it was like a light switch flipped immediately. And I was like, okay, yeah, this guy's a big, huge star and he's going to kill it here. But it was definitely a concern because of how badly he was beaten down by WWE.
And I remember that when he came in and like when he was out, I was someone that I'll take my L, that I thought he would disappear and randomly 10 years now we'd see him at like a guitar center and outside of like Reno, Nevada. But it's something that has become really clear after like he's talked about wrestling after he left WWE, and I know I've gone back to that whole time, but also like seeing what his mindset was before, that this is a guy who some way, somehow was going to become a lifer in wrestling. This is, in a lot of ways, I know we make comments about that. We think that the biggest expenditure in AEW should be therapy. In a lot of ways, wrestling is Jon Moxley's therapy. And it's so natural now, 19 months later, just to think about like, he's as ingrained in AEW, arguably more so than someone like Chris Jericho, who could just disappear tomorrow. I'm like, yep, that's fine. Or he's up there at the Bucks and the Elite as like someone who's like interwoven into the fabric of the company now 19 months later.
Absolutely. And, it's been interesting because, one of the first things we found out after Double or Nothing was that he would also be working with New Japan. Or I can't remember how that timing worked out, but we knew them roughly around the same time that he was working for both companies. And of course, COVID has impacted international travel in a way that we haven't really seen how that relationship would have played out, whether he would have, how often he would have been in Japan. And I guess, we hopefully will still get to see that in the future of how that's going to work out, whether he's going to be working at Wrestle Kingdom, etc. But I do think it would have been fascinating to see how those two things were balanced.
Yeah. And it's something now that Howard May being out, when we're recording this, Kenny Omega did an interview with Dave Meltzer and Garrett on WON F4W, talking about how the relationship now changes without Harold May in charge. So it does seem like that we were robbed of what this relationship would be with Moxley up until COVID, and now we're going to see what the new relationship is with AEW going forward. But when he went over to Japan, his first match, he won the IWGP US title from Juice Robinson, and then he entered the G1. So this was happening right before TV started for AEW, and he decided to go over to Japan and do a full G1. And one of his biggest matches in the next match we're going to be talking about was from the G1 Climax 29 at Corkin Hall on July 19th, 2019, him versus Tomohiro Ishii. And as someone who's mostly out on New Japan, this is the first time I saw this match leading up here. And boy, did it look like this is a guy that one of his big highlights in life was wrestling at Corkin Hall.
Yeah, he absolutely, I don't know. I mean, maybe the Brody thing's lazy, but he does feel like a guy. It's like, oh yeah, wrestling in Japan is a big deal. Like he understood that and appreciated it and was happy to be there. Yeah, he also, I mean, we learned a little bit of this from the Jericho interview, but it seemed that he was paying more attention to New Japan than I would have realized, because he seemed to understand Ishii immediately and like grasp who he was and what kind of match they should have against each other. And I know from very personal history or experience that Ishii doesn't speak a fucking word of English. So it's not like they talked this match out before they got in the ring together. I mean, obviously, I'm sure they work with translators or whatever to try to figure some things out. But
I mean, that's Shooter's job there. That's Shota Minu's job, is trying to get these two guys on the same page for this match. Like that's why he had a young boy, was to be like, hey, Shooter, I need you to tell him that we're gonna go brawl around Corkin Hall for like 10 minutes.
Right. A fun thing here was we got to see him use Regal's knee lift strike. and Kevin Kelly called it out as a William Regal move. So that was a nice bit of symmetry for this project that we were doing. And I was, this is kind of where I started thinking about what I was talking about earlier, because Kevin Kelly and Rocky Romero were trying to compare Moxley to other New Japan guys. Like, what kind of guy has Ishii wrestled before who's like Moxley? And Kevin Kelly bizarrely throws out Katsuyori Shibata, which is like, I just don't understand at all what those two people have in common. But that started making me think about it. And I was like, what are the aspects of Moxley's ring work that you would pull out? And it's like, well, there's not any. I mean, and I said earlier that I came out of this project with a deeper respect for his ring work. But despite that, there's just not a wrestling thing this guy is exceptional at. And I think that showed here. But still, he was able to have a really good, a match that I liked a lot with Ishii. A little too long for me in classic New Japan fashion.
Yeah.
But comparing it to that FCW match earlier, the crowd loved every minute of it. So hard for me to criticize the length of it.
No, it's something that, like, in this match, and I feel like this is more of a testament to Ishii and the idea that he kept so much tabs on what was going on in the wrestling world. He knew what the kind of, like, what he should do in this match, so Ishii could exhibit his best quality, which is just taking a fucking beating and looking like an absolute unit. And it played off like this match very much. So if the Regal match was him selling Regal and getting that over before having the finish where he conclusively destroyed the guy, this was basically Ishii taking everything that Moxley gave him and then coming back, and that made him look like a tough motherfucker. And it worked. And the crowd bought into everything here, even stuff that's a little bit cringe, like a dorky chair fight.
The cringiest part to me was the headbutt exchange, because it's like, it's just so poorly worked. And it's like, guys, if you're going to headbutt, I'm not saying they should shoot headbutt each other, but if you're going to do this spot, it's got to look a little better than this. The chair thing, I don't know. Mox kind of has that charisma that lets you buy into kind of goofy things sometimes. That's true. Okay, this is kind of fun. But it's like, what else was interesting? I think you're exactly right about kind of the story of the match. But Mox also sold pretty well for Ishii on like some big, like there's a shoulder tackle spot. And, Mox sold it like death. He like flipped backwards, like rolled over for it. So he really put over Ishii as like, yeah, he's also, not only is this guy strong enough to like knock down all these, the Japanese guys that he normally works with, but here's a 6'4", WWE guy, and he can knock me on my ass too. So I thought he did a good job of putting Ishii over too in a match that he would ultimately win.
Yeah, it's basically, I think, if you're looking for like a encapsulation of what that era of G1 was and the idea of a foreigner coming in here, this is like the textbook example of it. This was Meltzer gave it 5 stars. It's Meltzer. We really haven't talked star ratings, so I don't think that's really the point of this series in a way. But Meltzer gave it 5 stars. But this was worked to both these guys' strengths. It was Moxley being aware and coming into New Japan and at least having enough of a knowledge of it that he does not feel like he is just along for the ride. Like, he was engaged in the culture. You know how we talk about engaging with the culture? Jon Moxley got New Japan culture and got like, this is the guy of, this is not the kind of match I should have against someone else. I need to have this with Tomohiro Ishii. And 20-minute match, like it in G1 style, that there's a lot that we could be judicious about and take care of, but to have like Jon Moxley basically as this territory guy, like doing his Japan run, it felt like he fit like a glove.
Yeah. Now it is night 6. So I guess if he'd never seen Ishii before, he's at least seen 5 of his matches before this, so he's got some idea, but you have to pay real close attention. But something that's interesting, and this is also true of the Bloodsport match that we'll talk about last, is I've already said that Mox really doesn't change his style from the beginning to the end. But despite that, it's weird. He doesn't do any different moves really, but he's still able to adapt what he does to all these different places. He never seems out of place in a pretty wide variety of environments that we've talked about here. So that also really goes to like his value and his his goodness. That's not the word I want, but you know what I mean. As a worker,
his quality
as a worker. Yes.
And it's also something that, like, I don't have any other big takeaways for the Ishii match unless you do, but I think
no, it's just if you like this style, this New Japan style, you'll love this match. It's like a very good version of that style.
Yeah. But like, you're like talking about like him adapting, and it's him understanding the thing that he's able to do so, and understanding like the stakes and like what his opponents are. Because in this series, we had a bloody I quit match. We had a kind of territorial like feud ender. We had like the WWE spectacle. We had the New Japan sprint, and now we have Bloodsport. This was from October of this year from the Collective. Y'all heard me talk about this match before. This is Josh Barnett's Bloodsport 3. What a road it took for Jon Moxley to finally show up at Bloodsport. First, he was going to be at a Bloodsport, I think like right after All Out against Josh Barnett, but he had MRSA, so they pulled him from that. Then he was going to go against Josh Barnett in Tampa. COVID happened, but finally we had Jon Moxley versus Chris Dickinson, the Dirty Daddy, with our close personal friend of the program, Lenny Leonard, on the call. And what just like off the top, like what was your like thoughts about Moxley adapting again to the system, and then him like kind of showing up in Indianapolis as the biggest star in the world? And it's just kind of like a wild thing. Like what was your thoughts about this match in general?
Yeah, he comes out and the place goes insane, and you know he's in a fucking sweatshirt and his trunks. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this guy's a huge star, even though he kind of looks like a goof. You know, if you didn't know who he was, you're like, what do you have on here? But it works for him somehow. He jumps in the ring. And this match is very different than any of the other matches that we've talked about, just because he goes a lot more for a little bit of grappling, a little bit of submission, technical submission wrestling that he really didn't do in any of these other matches. But that's because it fits perfectly with the style, but he doesn't have to do a lot of offense that he doesn't normally do. I mean, he doesn't do a lot of these like leg holds, you know, that he does in this match, but it kind of fits perfectly. You know, he's in there with Chris Dickinson, who I think anybody who's listened to me ever knows that I love Chris Dickinson. I think he's great. He was great here. I felt, you know, it brought back up again just how bad I felt for Dickinson. Like one of the guys who suffered the most, you know, on a professional level, not on a lot of other levels, but suffered the most from COVID wiping out WrestleMania weekend. And, you know, Lenny Leonard talked about that on the call. And I was glad to see Mox working in there with him and giving him a lot, you know, so that Dickinson got to shine in the match. The slap spot where Moxley, they were like tied up and they broke out of it, and Moxley slapped him, and then Dickinson slapped the fuck out of him back. I really thought it was going to take off at that point, but then they kind of slowed it down with some more submission work. So it was a good match, a very good match, I would even say. I'm not sure it got kind of that next level I really wanted it to, of them just like beating the shit out of each other in a way, but that's not really the style of Bloodsport, not really like what they were going for. So I thought it worked on just about every level. The crowd loved it, and everybody came out looking better after the match, and it solidified my view of just like Mox as this guy who is, again, this is a positive comment, is all aura. That's just like, that's what he is. That's what he brings to wrestling, is this chameleon adaptability style that we've talked about, and the aura that he just ratchets every match up several levels.
And his adaptability was like my big takeaway from this, because the Bloodsport matches, no pinfalls, no rope breaks, there are no ropes, and no turnbuckles, and it's just submission or DQ, but he adapts to the surroundings. The big things was on this show where not a lot of people were ever getting out of the ring. He used the ring very deliberately as like, I'm out of my depth in submitting with Chris Dickinson, so I'm not going to try to convert this here. I'm going to try to roll him over. I'm bigger than him. I'll roll him over there. And of course, like the big post spot where he shoved him into the posts, and that really kind of set up Dickinson for like the last few minutes in the match, where it was Moxley kind of taking control and then being able to submit him with the bulldog choke. And it's just something that like you saw him come out there and you're just like, oh, he's the biggest star in the world, but he found a way as the biggest star in the world to make Chris Dickinson like walk away from this match. And you're like, oh, Chris Dickinson was probably like one more flurry away from submitting a double champion at that time. And I thought like that was something that like he went from being the territorial upstart to now being the traveling champion, and was like did the big thing that you want out of your traveling champion in the territory era, which is put over like the guy in the territory you're visiting and the upstart. And I feel like that Dickinson in this like defeat, like this is like, I always hate the idea of people saying, oh, this person looked great in defeat, this person gained a lot of defeat. But for like Dickinson at this point, who really kind of is one of the guys on the indies, has kind of brought Dickinson up there, like showing like, yeah, no, he is on Moxley's level in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think you can watch this without coming away with the realization, if you didn't have it before, that Chris Dickinson could absolutely work in AEW. I mean, he should never do this, but he would hold his own in WWE also if he wanted to. He doesn't have to be, the dirty daddy to be as high level as he can be. He's just great. And the idea, I'm sorry, I've done this rant so many times, but the idea that he's not signed to a major company is insane, especially after working this match with Moxley. You have to think that Moxley went back and said, have we thought about Dickinson? Have we thought about bringing him in? You'd love to see that. So, and maybe we will eventually. I certainly hope so.
Yeah. And really, as you said, Dickinson was the one person that he's talked about it. He was going to like be working in Japan all the time this year. Like this was supposed to be Chris Dickinson's year. And it's sad how it kind of turned out with that, especially like WrestleMania supposed to face Shingo Takagi at WrestleMania. I mean, come on, guys. That's if you're not down for that match, I don't know what we're doing here. But this kind of in a way would have had a little bit of redeeming to Dickinson's 2020, saying like, hey, I could have this. And if Tony Khan or people at AEW aren't going to bring in Chris Dickinson, then you're looking at like a systemic issue that you need to figure out there. Like there's an institutional failure there, because he made your champion look like even more of a badass, and he came away looking even better of it. Like he's the perfect kind of person that if they are looking to expand that way, Chris Dickinson would be one of my first phone calls.
Yeah, especially after seeing how well Eddie Kingston has worked in AEW. If there was any question about how Chris Dickinson would fit, I think Eddie Kingston has put any of that to rest. Not that they're all that similar as far as like in-ring style, but they have a similar aura about them, or like similar charisma. So I think that makes sense. But, maybe Chris is thinking, look, when this gate gets opened back up, I'm going to be in Japan, and that's what I want to do.
Yeah,
I could easily believe he's a guy who wants to go to Japan and have a run there. So maybe he's just holding out for that. Although I've gotten the sense from some of his public comments that he's just not been offered any deals by the major American companies, which is malpractice, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, that's an indictment on the entire industry there, if you ask me. And you brought like that thing again. Lenny Leonard, the best guy on commentary, bringing up like the idea early in this match, talking about Dick Kingston, because this match happened before, between their first match and between the pay-per-view match, saying did Kingston awaken something in him? Like, did this like do something with Moxley? And just being able to kind of weave this into like an overall kind of story, like interpromotional story of like Moxley trying to reach back and I guess reach and find like aspects of his career that he left behind. And I feel like that I don't think that Tony Khan or someone said, hey, hammer this point. That's just Lenny Leonard being the best in the world at what he does.
Yeah, he's another guy. I mean, obviously they have a ton of commentators, but if they want a good one, they should hire Lenny Leonard because, yeah, I mean, I can't think of anyone I think off the top of my head is better than Lenny is. He's certainly one of, if not the best in the entire world. Excalibur, I think, is also very good. But Lenny's probably better than Excalibur. So hard to think of anybody else off the top of my head who's better than he is. So there's plenty of talent out there that AEW hasn't mined. That's for sure. But, just thinking about Jon Moxley after watching all these, man, I love doing these. I love just watching like several matches of one guy or like spanning his whole career and talking about it and looking for the through line and looking for how things change. Like, this is so much fun to me. I just want to do a million more of these episodes.
Well, I had a blast in this. I'm glad that you like the matches I picked for this.
Yeah.
This was a little bit more of my thing, and I made you open the gate a little bit. So
you did. And maybe you do have to open the Dragon Gate to be good. Maybe we just have to take that away here.
I mean, maybe that's the big thing here. But yeah, no, this was a blast. It's interesting. I think that through this, and there were some things I already knew about Jon Moxley before getting into this, and like kind of taking a step back and viewing him through this certain like lens or microscope. But I really came out of this like thinking like he is someone that is just so clearly a time traveler from another age, like coming here. And a lot of people who seem like that they are out of time don't work, but he seems like that he's the person that, at least for like the last 10 years, he takes the aspects of being a traveling territory guy and being like a Bruiser Brody influence and being like this just complete sheer force that you could easily see in like world class in the 80s, or you could have saw him in Smoky Mountain with Ron Wright, the two of them cutting promos back and forth at each other, and then coming today. And it's very clear to me, like, this run that he's had over the last like 18 months, if it's not like the best of his career, it feels like this is the most fully actualized of a guy who even 10 years ago seemed to have the idea of what he was wanting to be and finally kind of reaching that point.
Absolutely. You can look back at his early stuff and say, well, he's kind of toned down some things, but also, all of us grow over 15 years as humans. And I think he's not been rounded off in the way that WWE wanted to do to him, because he's gained back some of that edge that he lost while he was there. But he's kind of like just the perfectly honed version of, the Jon Moxley that I saw in DGUSA. It's like, okay, well, if you change this and change this a little bit, and it's, something that a lot of people talk about as far as like wrestlers, it's that thing where, when your body and your mind, the de-evolution of your body and the evolution of your mind kind of meet up at this one level. And Moxley's there, right? Like, he's not as athletic or as fluid as he was in that DGUSA match. But he has a better idea. I'm confident, without having watched, that whole DGUSA run, but I'm confident that he has a better idea of how to adapt his style to everything, because we've seen that, in the New Japan and the Bloodsport match here, that he really knows how to do that. We've seen that. We're going to see that, I bet, in this like straight up match he's going to have with Kenny Omega versus the like weapons match that he had with Kenny Omega. So it's going to continue to be fascinating to see how he adapts to the different types of people they have in AEW for him to wrestle.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be really intriguing to see him provide that aspect and see where he goes into 2021 and to see what all is out there for Jon Moxley. Like, he's oddly, like, even for like being a promo guy and a very compelling promo guy, I kind of find like his aura and this idea that we've kind of developed of him just being like this kind of finally actualized person and actualized character and taking these aspects there. And I'm really intrigued to see where he goes from here. I think that it's going to be a very interesting next 24 months for Jon Moxley.
I agree, especially if he's going to lose the belt to Omega, as we all kind of assume. It's like, well, what comes next for the Moxley character? I said earlier, I think there's a heel run in there somewhere. I don't think it's time to do that yet at all, but there is a long heel run that he can have for sure. So, that's something else to look forward to. But we'll kind of see what the chapter is for him after losing the title. Definitely. He's a guy that I'm honestly, after watching these matches and thinking about this and doing this show, I'm more interested in Jon Moxley than I was before we started preparing for this show.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I'm glad that we chose this as the next topic. We will, in the show notes, I'll have links to all these matches, and I'll try to find the really weird promo that I was talking about, the one that like when he just got back into wrestling, and throw it in there as well. But I think that's going to do it for this episode, AB. Do you have anything else you want to hit on before we get out of here?
No, we'll just, I guess we're going to try to do this monthly. I think that's the idea going forward. So we'll regroup and see who the next person that we want to do is, and whether it makes sense for me and Mike to do that episode, depending on who it is. There's certainly some that I've had it planned previously that I had ideas for guests for, and at some point, like I always complain about the company, we're going to have to also admit that women exist and do a woman wrestler. So maybe I'll reach out to someone who watches a little more women's wrestling than either of us has in the past, who can help with something like that. So we'll kind of see who's next. I was scrolling through the roster here toward the end, thinking about where should we go next? So we'll have to figure that out.
I'm going to put this out here, and sadly, I don't think I'm the person to be on this episode. I think Hikaru Shida probably is the person that is next, especially Riho would have been the obvious one, but since Riho obviously isn't around right now, it seems like Hikaru Shida, unless you were going to go, I wouldn't want to do that, SCU. That's the only other thing, maybe.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, see, it depends of how you want to do this. If you want to knock all the top people out early, it's we still need to do an Omega episode.
Yeah.
So, and especially if he's going to win the title in December, that might be interesting. And Shida was the other one I've thought about a lot. And if we're going down the champions, obviously Darby Allin is one that we could do. And I previously had a Darby Allin This Is planned. So we may circle back to that in the future. But those are definitely some ideas for where we'll go next with this series.
Yeah, for sure. And if y'all have any bigger is there someone we're forgetting for This Is that and if there's a groundswell that wants us to really do a This Is Orange Cassidy, just let us know. We'll like to have to see what y'all think of this. But thank y'all for listening. AB, thank you for having me on for this one. This one was a blast. I hope you got something out of this.
Absolutely, I did. Thanks for putting this all together and leading us through this episode. I had as great a time as I did on the Jericho episode. So this was a lot of fun.
For sure. And that's going to do it for this episode of This Is Jon Moxley. We'll be back with you later this week with just the usual weekly things. I don't know if we have anything special cooked up this week, but we'll do something. We'll do something. I'm trying to think of a way to close this out.
All right, bud. Well,
all right, y'all. We'll catch you next time. All right, bye.
AB again. Thought it'd be funny to jump in at the end of this show again and just say, if you enjoyed that, I hope you did, just head over to patreon.com/everythingelite and subscribe. But regardless, stay keyed into this feed. We'll be back on the next Thursday, whatever time you're listening to this. When Thursday comes around, we'll be back with a free show. Thanks everyone again for listening. It means a lot to all of us. We really appreciate it.